corporation dedicated to physical rehabilitation was secretly suffering from a terminal financial disease. On the surface, HealthSouth was a miracle of modern healthcare economics, a behemoth operating nearly 2,000 facilities across the United States. But beneath the pristine clinical facades and the soaring stock price lay a staggering paradox. The company was hemorrhaging cash, its apparent vitality sustained entirely by a $2.7 billion fabrication. How does a publicly traded giant, scrutinized by legions of auditors and analysts, invent billions of dollars out of thin air? The answer lies not in sophisticated financial engineering, but in a brutal culture of absolute loyalty, where a charismatic leader demanded impossible results and a terrified inner circle manufactured them. At the center of this colossal deception was Richard Scrushy, the visionary founder and CEO of HealthSouth. Scrushy was not merely an executive, he was a corporate monarch who built his empire from a single clinic in Birmingham, Alabama, into a multi-billion-dollar juggernaut. He understood the relentless theater of Wall Street, recognizing that a company's valuation was inextricably linked to its ability to meet or beat quarterly earnings estimates. For years, HealthSouth delivered on those expectations. Scrushy cultivated an aura of invincibility, demanding perfection from his subordinates while enjoying a lavish lifestyle funded by soaring stock options. The illusion began to fracture in the late 1990s. Changes in Medicare reimbursement policies severely curtailed the revenue streams of rehabilitation facilities nationwide. HealthSouth suddenly faced a massive financial shortfall. The legitimate earnings of the company could no longer satisfy the insatiable expectations of the market. In the unforgiving arena of publicly traded equities, admitting a failure to meet projections guarantees a brutal sell-off. Faced with this reality, the corporate boardroom transformed from a center of strategic planning into an incubator for systemic deception. To bridge the chasm between reality and expectation, Scrushy allegedly weaponized his authority, applying direct pressure on his financial executives to alter the financial reality. This was not a passive oversight, it was an active top-down mandate. The mechanism of this coercion was a secretive gathering known internally as the family meeting. In these clandestine sessions, Scrushy and his most trusted financial officers would review the actual dismal earnings and compare them to the consensus estimates of Wall Street analysts. The difference between the two figures was referred to by the executives simply as the hole. Filling that hole required crossing the Rubicon from aggressive accounting into outright criminality. The mandate issued during the family meetings was unequivocal: fix the numbers. Employees were directed to commit accounting fraud on an industrial scale. The financial team scoured the company's sprawling ledgers to find the dirtiest numbers, targeting areas where expenses could be minimized or revenues artificially inflated with the least likelihood of detection. They manipulated the income statements by reducing the reserves for uncollectible accounts, essentially pretending that bad debts were guaranteed cash. But manipulating the income statement creates a dangerous imbalance. To keep the balance sheet aligned with the fabricated profits, the accounting department had to invent fictitious assets. Fictitious assets are phantom entries on a balance sheet, created out of thin air to legitimize non-existent revenue and keep the fundamental accounting equation in equilibrium. The HealthSouth team systematically logged thousands of fake journal entries, classifying them as fixed asset additions. A non-existent physical therapy machine or a phantom clinic renovation was recorded as a tangible corporate asset, inflating the company's net worth by billions. The sheer volume of these fraudulent entries was designed to exploit a specific vulnerability in the external auditing process. The perpetrators understood that auditors from Ernst & Young, one of the premier accounting firms in the world, did not examine every single transaction. Instead, auditors relied on a materiality threshold, typically ignoring individual asset additions under $5,000. Armed with this knowledge, the HealthSouth financial team deliberately kept their fabricated journal entries below that exact threshold. They buried the $2.7 billion fraud beneath a mountain of seemingly insignificant data points, rendering the deception invisible to standard auditing algorithms. Executing a scheme of this magnitude required absolute complicity from the top echelons of the finance department. Over the course of the fraud, 5 successive chief financial officers participated in the deception. The psychological environment within Health South was one of intense coercion and misplaced loyalty. Scrushy demanded unwavering fealty, rewarding those who protected the illusion with lucrative salaries and stock options, while ruthlessly sidelining anyone who questioned the methodology. The executives who attended the family meetings became trapped in a compounding lie, knowing that to expose the fraud was to implicate themselves in a federal crime. As the new millennium dawned, the burden of sustaining the fiction grew exponentially. The hole between actual revenue and reported earnings widened every quarter, requiring ever more audacious fabrications. The shadow of that intricate accounting still loomed over every corporate decision. Scrushy continued to project supreme confidence, navigating the fallout of the dot-com crash and the subsequent scrutiny of corporate America with practiced ease. Yet inside the walls of the Birmingham headquarters, the architects of the scheme were buckling under the psychological weight of their own creation. The breaking point arrived in the spring of 2003. Weston Smith, a former CFO who had intimate knowledge of the family meetings and the systematic falsification of records, could no longer endure the anxiety of the impending collapse. Recognizing that the fraud was mathematically unsustainable, Smith made a fateful decision. He bypassed internal compliance channels, which were thoroughly compromised, and went directly to federal investigators. His defection provided the FBI with the ultimate key to unlocking the Health South vault, an insider willing to map the exact anatomy of the deception. The response from law enforcement was swift and devastating. In March 2003, FBI agents raided the Health South headquarters, seizing thousands of documents and hard drives. The pristine facade of the rehabilitation empire crumbled overnight. Trading of Health South stock was immediately halted as the market absorbed the shockwave of the revelations. The SEC stepped in, launching a massive forensic investigation. As detailed in the 2003 SEC complaint, the company had systematically overstated its earnings to meet Wall Street expectations, orchestrating a massive fraud that deceived investors, creditors, and the public. The regulatory landscape had fundamentally shifted just months prior to the Health South raid. In the wake of the Enron and WorldCom collapses, Congress had passed the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, a sweeping piece of legislation designed to restore investor confidence. Sarbanes-Oxley required CEOs and CFOs to personally certify the accuracy of their company's financial reports, imposing severe criminal penalties for willful misrepresentation. Richard Scrushy found himself squarely in the crosshairs of this new legal framework. He became the first chief executive indicted under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, charged with masterminding the colossal accounting fraud. The 2003 indictment laid out a devastating narrative of corporate greed and coercive leadership. Prosecutors alleged that Scrushy was the undisputed architect of the fraud, the man who convened the family meetings and ordered his subordinates to falsify the ledgers. The government's case appeared insurmountable. They had flipped all 5 former CFOs, who took the stand to testify against their former boss. They detailed the direct pressure they faced, painting a portrait of a CEO who bullied and bribed his way to artificial financial targets. However, the courtroom is a theater of reasonable doubt, and Scrushy mounted an audaciously counterintuitive defense. His legal team argued that the CEO was completely ignorant of the $2.7 billion fabrication happening right under his nose. They positioned Scrushy as a visionary leader betrayed by a rogue faction of financial executives. The defense asserted that the family of CFOs had orchestrated the fraud independently, hiding the truth from Scrushy to protect their own lucrative positions. It was a high-stakes gamble, shifting the blame entirely onto the very witnesses the government relied upon. In a verdict that stunned the legal and financial communities, the strategy succeeded. In 2005, a jury acquitted Richard Scrushy of all criminal charges related to the massive accounting fraud. The outcome highlighted a profound systemic vulnerability in prosecuting corporate crime. It demonstrated the immense difficulty of proving a CEO's direct, knowing involvement beyond a reasonable doubt when the physical execution of the fraud is carried out by subordinates. The architect of the culture of deception walked free from criminal liability, shielded by the very hierarchy he had weaponized. But the criminal acquittal did not absolve Scrushy of the catastrophic damage inflicted upon the company. The civil reckoning proved far more perilous. Shareholders whose investments had been obliterated when the true financial state of Health South was revealed pursued relentless litigation. In a subsequent civil trial, a judge found Scrushy liable for the fraud, ruling that he had breached his fiduciary duties. He was ordered to pay an astonishing $2.88 billion in restitution. The civil judgment served as a stark financial condemnation, even as the criminal justice system had failed to secure a conviction. The human cost of the Health South scandal extended far beyond the courtroom battles and the staggering financial penalties. Thousands of dedicated employees who had spent their careers rehabilitating patients faced massive layoffs and the decimation of their retirement savings. These workers had invested their lives in a company they believed was fundamentally sound, only to discover it was built on a foundation of fictitious assets and forged ledgers. Their financial security was sacrificed to maintain the illusion of perpetual growth. Today, the Health South saga remains a definitive case study in the pathology of corporate fraud. It exposes the lethal combination of relentless market pressure, a domineering chief executive, and a compliant financial team willing to cross ethical boundaries. The scandal reveals how easily the mechanisms of accountability can be subverted by a centralized, coercive authority. It is a chilling reminder that behind every massive financial fabrication lies a series of deeply human choices driven by fear, greed, and the dangerous belief that the numbers can always be fixed.